All right. Well, this is the first episode of the podcast. We have yet to come up with a name for the podcast, but we'll start with an introduction. And why don't you go first?
My name is Kay, and I am 77 years old, and he may call me Nana. I am his
I will call her Nana.
grandmother.
Yep.
And
My name is Brett. I am 27. I am her grandson. And we decided that we wanted to start doing some conversations and taping a podcast because there is a lot of contrast between the two of us. There is exactly 50 years of age, obviously male and female. And then someone, myself, who leans more to the right from a conservative point of view, and someone who leans more to the left from a liberal point of view. I was the one who brought this up because we've been having these conversations for quite some time, and I think that there's a great demand out there for free talk, long-form conversation between two people that have a lot of respect and love for one another, but also see things from two very different historical points of view, gender points of view, and political points of view. And it's very interesting how we come to those conclusions and how our thoughts are based, a lot around those things.
And can I say, Brett, it's interesting because you say we have talked through the years. Can I share a story?
Yeah.
When you were 3 years of age, you were riding in the car with me in your car seat. And all of us in the front seat, because we didn't know that kids had to be in the back yet. And all of a sudden, he turned to me and you said, Nana, do you think that you and I were together before I was born, before I was in my mama's tummy? And that was the most shocking things I have ever heard. I'd never heard something like that, especially from a 3-year-old. And I said, I don't know, Brett, what do you think? And you said, I think so, Nana, I think so. So to me, that was the beginning of our being able to talk and communicate.
Yeah. And I think it's true. And not to get into too many details, but I think that, maybe we do hold on to things in our subconscious or in the dark matter of our brain. And there is a reason why we're drawn to certain things or we're fearful of certain things, is because maybe throughout our DNA recognizes it in some dark part of the brain or subconscious that, you recognize people or spirits or situations. And, that might be more part of the equation than in today's society we like to give it credit.
It could be.
So I think that what we thought would be very, very interesting is to kind of talk through issues of the day. And we both have a passion and a big interest in society and in culture and in improving society and improving culture, and doing that through improving people's lives.
Values.
And we think that there is a big lack of dialogue.
And can I add something
Yep.
else? And listening. There's a lack of listening.
Of course. And because of that, we thought it'd be very, very interesting, because neither one of us know of anybody who's sitting down with somebody who's 50 years older that has the differences that we have, and kind of talking through the issues and maybe humanizing them a little bit and helping to understand where the other person comes from and why they feel that way. And, one of the first things that we kind of want to discuss is dialogue, and how the breakdown in communication, because, right now, to kind of frame the conversation to the country, and I think, globally, of course, but I think, civilization is in a state of metamorphosis right now. And we're seeing a lot of what was old. The old way is being,
Crumbling.
yeah, it's crumbling, and is being heavily rebelled against by some, and then others are doing everything they can to hold on to it. And as somebody who's been on this earth for 77 years, uh, has a lot more perspective as to, how things were back then. And then somebody who's only been on this earth for 27 years and is seeing things, as they are today, and I don't have that historical frame of reference. Why are people trying to get rid of it so much, and why are others clinging to so many parts of it? And I think one of the big things is dialogue. And I think that dialogue takes respect, and it takes patience
And listening.
and listening and listening. So
And it should be a safe place.
it should be.
It should be a safe place where people or two individuals can come together and one says something or gives their opinion or their thoughts on something, and the other one doesn't jump in and attack. They listen to what they say and they allow it to kind of settle a little bit before and then they don't say, you are wrong, that's not right, but maybe we can learn to say, oh, that's interesting, tell me more about how you feel, so I can understand better,
Yeah, and I think that's, instead of trying to prove that you're right or the other person's wrong, I think it does help to explain how you came to that conclusion, explain what your perspective is of the situation. And that allows another person to kind of see it from your side of things and kind of understand how you came to that conclusion. And I think that dialogue in today's society, and we don't want this to be about politics necessarily, but politics, the root of politics are differences in, cultural differences and personality differences. And kind of the fruit ends up being politics. So I think a good place to start is dialogue. And in my opinion, everything, the way that people absorb their information in today's society is so often in small clips. You turn on the way that the media and unfortunately kind of journalism is framed at this point is about ratings, and it's about 30 seconds here, a minute here, 2 minutes there, and it doesn't give the viewer enough time to really understand the perspective of the issue, and kind of get to the bottom of it. And I think that probably has to do with attention span. At this point, it's like we live in a world where people's attention span has gotten so small, that people think that you're not capable of sitting down and really talking for 45 minutes or really getting through an issue. And it's really more about proving that I'm right and the other person's wrong, rather than kind of what you were just saying. Let's remember that we're trying to get to a solution.
We're trying to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
We're both trying to learn. And I think time has shown us a couple of things. One is that we're afraid of change. And we do everything in the world not to accept it. And I think that my generation has a very hard time with that. And it is losing control. Control is an illusion, don't you think? In the beginning, no one has control. I mean, we can see that Mother Nature can take control and pull the rug right out from under us, or a house right out from under us. So we never really have control. That is an illusion.
Yeah, but I think that it's in our nature as human beings, as Homo sapiens, pattern recognition. Is a big part of the reason why our species has evolved. And I think when people figure out a pattern that gets them to the next phase, then there's a fine line there, because what worked for yesterday doesn't necessarily work for tomorrow. or for today. So I don't blame people for saying, hey, I want to hold on to this style of life. Like Make America Great Again. Make America Great Again is such a loaded sentence because one half of the country or one style of thinking looks at all the reasons why America, they look at the positivity of why America was great in the past, and they look at the positive side of things. Where another half of society at this point says, make America great again. What do you mean, slavery?
Exactly.
You know, what do you mean, women don't have rights?
Exactly.
And
Can't vote.
yeah, exactly. And so they look at the negative and they say, what do you mean? You mean make America the same as it used to be? And I think, you know, that's a great topic to talk about too, because there's so much in there. There's so much in there. And the way that the conversation gets polarized is that one side, it's make America great again. And the other side is, what do you mean America was never great?
Well, America is great.
Yeah.
As some say.
Exactly.
America is great.
Yes. But, you know, I think that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, but that's the way that the conversation gets polarized into where you're either on one side or the other. When if you really take a look at it, you know, America, you know, there's always a dichotomy. There's always a dichotomy. And so by saying I want to throw the old America out and start this brand new America, well, you got to look at what you're throwing out. You know, I mean, because even though there are a lot of scars in our past in this country, at the same time, we had a lot of terrific things going as well. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You saw me go.
Yeah.
Also, you know, we have a lot of scars from the past,
Yeah.
but they made us who we are today. That's an important part. I mean, I can look back on certain decisions that I made in my lifetime, and I could say, oh, I feel horrible about that. I shouldn't have done, but you know what? It kind of opens me so I understand my fellow man when they say, oh, this is terrible what I'm doing. I can say, I know. So I think everything that happens to us in life, you know, we have to respect that. Not judge it, respect it, and take the good part, the essence of it, and apply it to now, the present moment.
Learn from it.
Yes, exactly.
And evolve.
And I think that is how we expand our thinking. As we say, expand our consciousness. You know, because first, I did want to say, we can't ever go back. You know, that's gone. That's gone. We can't change that. But we can take the good part of it, like you say, and we can apply it now.
Yeah, learn from it and make it better. So, okay, you know, here were the mistakes that were made. Maybe the intentions were correct, but the execution was poor. Maybe the intentions were correct, but the unforeseen consequences, you know, they were unforeseen. And you know, how can we take that same intention and evolve it and make it work today? And I think that and I think that's the reason why, you know, we want to do this and why conversation and dialogue is so important is because, you know, there are a lot of scars. There are a lot of scars in the past. In civilization, human beings are very, very messy. And I think that we have kind of hit a level of consciousness over the past 20 years thanks to the mass communication, aka the internet. You know, the internet allows you to take a look at every single aspect and facet of life. It allows you, it's an never-ending library of how every other human being on planet Earth is operating. What works, what doesn't work, and it's a massive amount of intel that is flowing into people's brains that wasn't there before. And I think one of the greatest things that it does is it strips away fear in a lot of ways.
Or creates more.
Or creates more, But at least when it comes to, because so many of our issues in today's world is, you know, when people are different than you, we fear what we don't know, right?
No, fear the unknown.
Okay?
Always.
And so you can see where, you know, and I think this is really important. I always go back to this, and you know, I always look at things through this very, very kind of primitive lens, or at least I like to take in nature and the way that we evolved has to be part of the equation. It isn't anymore, and in my opinion, it's sometimes I feel like, well, on both sides, and when we say both sides of the aisle, it's just really kind of more of a way to frame the conversation so people understand what we're talking about. I really think there are very few people, especially in my generation, that really relate to one political party or one, oh, I'm a Republican, so I believe in everything the Republicans do. Just like I think that most Democrats my age too, they lean that way, but everyone's seeking a new way of looking at things.
Or a melding of the two ways.
Exactly.
Or it becomes workable.
Because there's really good in both.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
The industrious nature of the corporate far right masculine personality is unbelievably important to civilization and to culture, but we've seen where it's gone terribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen where the what I consider the empathy of people that lean left, well, the empathy absolutely has to balance out the industry.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go too far into empathy, you get into major issues too.
We saw that a lot in unions.
Yeah,
You know, unions were absolutely necessary.
absolutely.
And they got a little carried away. And it became more about power and less about the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And why did it happen? Maybe because the business itself was becoming more about power and less about the individuals. So neither was 100% right or 100% wrong. They're
Mhm.
both necessary. We just didn't know how to work them together.
Well, and it
It's
just,
called compromise.
yeah. And I mean, I think it's a law of nature and a law of at least human nature that when the pendulum swings, it's going to swing too far.
Mm-hmm. It's
Um,
going to come back.
And it's going to come back. And I think that we're getting to a point in society at this point where, you know, now that all sorts of different societies have, you know, people have tried socialism, communism, democracies, monarchies. I mean, everything's been tried to the point that we kind of have some intel now. We kind of have some research and some data. And then on top of that, we have the internet and we have this unbelievable knowledge age. Because that's kind of what we're in right now. It's like this crazy knowledge age.
Absolutely.
And to where you can you can see really what works and what doesn't work. And I think that, and we've talked about this too, I think that, you know, the pendulum, you know, I think what we're trying to do here is help the pendulum settle into the middle somewhere. And then maybe, hopefully, at some point in society, we kind of have it a little bit figured out, and then we can just kind of go back to being happy and quit looking at each other in such a tribal nature. But I mean, on the unions, I think that's a perfect point to where, you know, it's like, as a Republican, you know, I'm not allowed to sit here and say that, some unions are good or unions are good in general. I think the majority of people totally understand why unions came about.
Absolutely.
And
I hope so, if
but-
they studied history.
Exactly. And now I think that the pendulum, in a lot of circumstances, from a union standpoint, has swung to the point now where, you know, not only can you not get fired, but you really just have no consequences. And that's not good either.
It comes back to the same thing that we touched on a little bit earlier. It's change. It's change, and it's not only change, it's letting go of what you want. Me letting go of what. I read the other day something that was interesting. It said, "My freedom stops where the other person's begins." I hope I got that quote right.
Yeah.
You know, it's so interesting what is happening now. with letting go, with change,
Mhm.
because we are in a rapid change right now.
Oh, yeah.
And whether we want it or not, it's happening. It's happening in many different ways. It's happening in our climate. It's happening, oh my goodness, the number of floods and tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes and volcano eruptions. And I mean, look at what's going on. Icebergs breaking and melting. And on the other hand, look at the shootings that are going on right now. It's like there is this desperate need for something. People are trying to, they're yelling out, they're speaking out.
Mhm.
And some of them are screaming because they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They don't know which way to go, and they are afraid.
Mhm.
They are very much afraid. And I think we don't trust, which I'm kind of getting, but all these things are so wrapped up together.
Yeah. Well, and fear has been exploited
Absolutely.
since the beginning of time. Since the first ape man was afraid, another ape man was there to say, hey, I'll take care of you. This guy's the problem.
Yeah.
Or this is the problem. And so often people that are afraid or that are underprivileged or that have this stacked deck against them get convinced. And that's one of my big issues right now in today's society is that so many groups and so many minority groups, if you can even, I mean, I guess you can still call them that. I mean, we're becoming such a melting pot that it's almost like we're not even going to be able to talk about we're not even going to talk about exactly the white race is minority.
The minority, exactly.
I guess we always have been too, to a little extent, but a lot of the minorities, at least in this country, okay, the dialogue has been turned to less what can you control and what are you doing about what is in your control. And it's been turned to who can you blame?
Absolutely. That's a very good pointing the finger.
Well, and sometimes the finger needs to be pointed.
Okay, I agree.
There have been very real issues. Like let's talk about feminism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a great one to talk about. You lived through a time where women were suppressed in this country. Mm-hmm. Women were not allowed to vote.
Or open a bank account.
Account.
Well, now wait a minute, vote. Now don't, I'm 77, but let's not be, okay. But no,
Well,
no,
but you know what
you're
I
right.
mean.
Yes, I do know what you mean.
It weren't allowed, the environment, they were very suppressed and disrespected. Mm-hmm. You lived through that. Now, from my perspective, and I think from a lot of young people's perspective, including tons of young women, they're looking around. The moral of the story is what's being thrown out there in the public by, kind of the left in this country. And again, when I say left in this country, I mean, and this is one of the biggest issues that I think we both agree upon, is that the right in this country, you can probably name like 5 people, like Sean Hannity, Fox News, Donald Trump, like such a small group of people hold the messaging for so many people. And I think one of the big things that we want to do here is just another outlet too to take a look at how the majority of people in this country don't agree. They don't align with that. But that's the only thing that you hear. That's the message that's being put out. So, we probably should call this the Compromise Podcast or something like that, because I think that if people do sit down and talk about it, you realize that, okay, we're actually on the same page. Maybe you lean a little bit this way and I lean a bit that way, but as long as we respect each other and kind of hold each other out, then we can keep on going forward.
That's it.
So when it comes to feminism at this point in the country, the ideal is that nothing's changed. Is that women are still being suppressed. Women don't make as much as men do. Women still don't get the respect they deserve. There's still all this patriarchal misogyny going on behind the scenes, and there's like this, dark empire going on, and men are all secretly talking at night on the phone going, hey, we gave them that, but yeah, let's make sure they still stay in their position.
Stay in their place.
Exactly. We're a lot of guys in my generation that didn't live through, didn't live through that. Have never really seen that. Are sitting there going, "You're crazy. What are you talking about?" But the scars are still there, and I think it's extremely dynamic because you still have the baby. People are living longer, and they're staying mentally sound longer, and that's going to be a good thing and a problem that human beings have to deal with from here on out, because that age range is only going up and up and up with modern science and health and everything else. So how, I guess my question is, how do we make sure that you have a class of people, like let's say you have women of your age, okay, democratic women that went through all that. It seems to me like they never forgave men. And now they are venting all of this pent up aggression and anger and hurt onto young women. And they're also the ones with money. And they're also the ones in leadership positions. And now they have all these young women wrapped up in this storm going, hey, don't forget, we're women and they're men. They're the quasi-enemy. And I wonder how much of that's going on with all of our issues that divide us in this country. How much of it is, your generation not accepting that things have changed? Or do you think that they have? I mean, what's your perspective on that? As far as, at least the female issue is concerned, the female and male, because I see it as a big thing right now.
I absolutely understand what you're asking. And what popped in my mind was, I also lived through JFK being assassinated. And then the hope with Bobby Kennedy, and he was assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. As they say, the good Pope was assassinated. I watched all that, and I remember, I didn't just watch it. It was like gut-wrenching. You thought you couldn't breathe, okay? And then all these years later, I'm just giving you my experience.
Yeah.
All these years later, I saw a black man in Chicago stand up when he was winning the election to become president of the United States. And I started bawling like a baby. And I thought, where is this coming from? It was from all that holding it in, going back to John Kennedy, going back to being told as a single mother, a divorced mother with 3 children, you can't open a bank account without a man signing for you. What? After paying all the bills, all of these things, the same with the electric company demanding another deposit because I was putting it in my name. It doesn't make sense. Working in my insurance, my medical insurance, because I was of childbearing age, I had to pay more than the males, and yet I couldn't have children. It didn't make sense to me, and it did make me angry.
Of course.
It didn't have to be that way. So I think there is oppression. I think we do hold things in. I know I do. I can only speak for myself. I cannot speak for a black person or for other groups who are going through hell, okay? Right this moment, okay? I can only speak for myself. But you're right. And you do want to blame. And there's a part of you that kind of wants to get even. But if you learn in life, you expand your awareness, your consciousness, you can realize, if you're lucky, there is a moment when one has to let it go. And how do you do that? You look at the suffering that's going on right now, and it may be the white males of our society who are going to be suffering the most. That may be the next group, okay? And you understand. You do, it helps in a way when you understand.
Yeah.
You have empathy for them. You're no longer blaming. You have nothing to do with any of that. You're not that person.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't mean to be,
Yeah,
you
no,
asked a
I
question,
mean-
I answered.
And so, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and so I think that that's just kind of touched too. I mean, on, psychological wounds
Mhm.
are just like physical wounds.
Exactly. And spiritual wounds.
Yeah, I mean, at first, I think the first thing you have to do is tamper the inflammation. And then there's always going to be a scar there. And so, I think one of my big questions is, and, the kind of things that we've talked about in the past is, have things changed though? Do you, from your perspective, do you think things have changed, or do you think it kind of speaks to more of, because to kind of expand it a little bit, I think that people really try to create this like utopia that they think the world should be like.
Illusion.
In the illusion that that people are not people, that they've somehow expanded past the beastliness of the Homo sapien, and now that we're somehow newly and enlightened in all this stuff, when in reality we are driven by such primitive necessities.
Mm-hmm. Survival.
Exactly, and like it goes down to like men in today's culture, like for instance, and I was just telling Mackenzie this, my girlfriend, the other day, is that we were in Salt Lake City and we went to kind of a a hippie hipster style coffee house, okay, where you can expect to find a lot of people that are on the far left, okay, but that's actually kind of, they usually run the best restaurants, so it's unfortunate, but
Ooh, get you on that one
I was
later.
just kidding. But so I mean, it looked like a great place to go, so we went. But I realized, I would come up to the door. I hold the door open for Mackenzie.
Mm-hmm.
Then I see this nice young lady walking up the path, and I keep the door open. And she looked at me and and kept on walking in, and then walked right past me. And didn't say thank you or anything like that, because we've gotten to the point now in today's society where you can't even hold the door open for a lot of young women, because they view it as like, oh, what, I can't open the door myself. And it's like,
It's temporary, Brett. That's a stage. That is a stage. I can remember.
and that's
Excuse
happened multiple times. I mean, that
I'm
happens on a
sure.
regular basis, and I can tell you who it's going to be when they're walking up.
Okay.
Like, unfortunately.
Okay, I can't, I remember, this is a shocker. I remember being in a restaurant,
Keep on going.
and the ladies' room, the restroom was crowded, and I went into the men's room. And I dared anyone to say anything. And I was, 30, maybe, 35 years of age. I was trying to, and really, that's not too different from her. I had that same attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I wore it, I was trying to prove who I was. I was actually trying to find who I was.
Yeah.
And perhaps, I've seen this before too. But, we still have to give her a chance. Let's wait till she's 77.
Let's wait. So I guess it does kind of boil back down to kind of a confidence and a security thing, because we should be able to. I just get worried because it's almost like in a lot of ways, we have spent so much time, kind of expanding in the topic of gender, because I think it's such an important topic.
Mm-hmm. And you are a gentleman.
Well,
You
I
are
was
a
raised to be.
gentleman.
I was raised
know,
to be a
I know.
gentleman by women, by the way.
I know, you have strong role models.
Well, and
those women.
and guess what? I'm a strong believer that men and women are different.
They are. I will agree with that.
Okay, good.
And I'm here to say I know.
Okay, good. And so, but I think, and I want to know what you think about this, because in the past, men and women were totally different, divided. Men had roles and women had roles, and the classic, the woman was the housewife and the man went out and worked every day.
Before that, she was gathering berries off the bushes while he went out
Hunting.
Hunting.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
Which again, I think is actually kind of a profound thing to bring up and people forget about.
Yeah.
But so going back to the pendulum, before, men and women were so divided, and then the pendulum swang, and women said, "We're done with this crap. We can do everything that you can do," and we started seeing feminism take root, and it was, in my opinion, a righteous cause in its beginning, because it needed to swing. That patriarchal system was not only disrespectful and immoral and all that stuff, but at the same time it was also stupid, because you want the biggest variety of people making the decisions, because that's how you have the greatest amount of input anyway. So I think from a societal standpoint, it's like sometimes you're much better off with a woman in that role than a man in that role.
And we may see that.
Well, I think we are starting to see that in large extent. But so I think that we only looked at the different ends of the spectrum with male and female. Male was G.I. Joe, businessman, and woman was the most Betty, homemaker, all that stuff. So the pendulum has swung now in today's society, and I think it's really interesting, where we literally, all the focus when it comes to gender, and I think this is very destructive, personally, I really do. Now it's almost like the pendulum swung, and we started focusing on, okay, well, who's in the middle? And homosexuality became much more, that needed to be fixed. The perception of that needed to be fixed, because homosexuals weren't allowed to be homosexual. They had to stay in the closet. They had to do all these things. They've been persecuted since the beginning of time. And I don't know, I mean, maybe in other societies and different times it was more accepted, but at least in the Americas in the 1990s and the 20th century, I mean, it took all the way until the last 20, 25 years since it's been...
And remember, excuse me for interrupting, but
Yeah.
these had to do with laws. Women and children were the possession of the male. It
Yeah.
was in our laws.
Yep.
And the same with homosexuals. I mean, they had words for that, and people could go to prison for that or be executed. Go ahead.
So now the focus has become so much on the people in the middle. And now in today's society, we've driven it down so much that the whole transgender thing has become big over the last five or so years. I mean, it's been all over the news, and you had the bathroom situations, and you have people that, say, oh no, a man should be able to go into a woman's bathroom no matter what. It doesn't matter what the biological situation is. How you feel is who you really are. And I think that's where we start going into the pendulum swinging too far the other way. Because you run into a whole lot of different issues. I mean, because people are going to take advantage of it.
Of course.
People are going
Always have.
But to not get into that, we can get into that on another conversation more, because I think there's a lot there. But now the focus is so much in the middle as to that small group of people, that 5% of the population. It's not 5%. It's more like 1% of the population, where it starts to cross over, and it does. You have men out there that are G.I. Joe, businessman, all that crap, and that isn't because of necessarily behavioral. Biologically, they're testosterone-driven, alpha male-driven type guys. But then you also have guys like, I always bring up like Andy Dick or Prince. Okay, they're right there. They're right there where, they're damn near as much like women as they are like men.
Yeah.
And so you have that mix, just like you have women that are,
G.I. Joe.
they can't relate to
G.I.
Barbie
Joe.
at all.
No,
They want it. They're G.I. Joe.
I know, that's what I said.
And so, but we've made it so. I think the danger that we've run into as a society at this point is that media and culture and Hollywood and all that stuff, who kind of controls the messaging that's going out there, has made that righteous. And being a manly man, or being a woman who says, God, I much rather get pregnant, have kids, and stay at home and raise my kids. I'd rather take a few years off from the law firm and raise my kids. They're almost looked down upon to a certain extent, like a woman being like raising kids and doing those naturally maternal or historically female attributes has almost been looked down upon. And that's what kind of concerns me. And it concerns me because when I look at the younger generation, when I look at Isabella, my little sister, who's turning 16 years old in a month, you know, like that generation, I'm worried that we've glorified the in the middle people so much that's now popular. That's the popular thing. You can't turn on MTV or any of these programs without it's like everybody's gay, everybody's trans. And of course, we needed to realize that is perfectly fine as society, and we need to be welcoming of that. But at the same time, if you glorify it and you start having people race to that, well, you kind of lose your men and you kind of lose your women. And I think that it's kind of like Make America Great Again, you know, throwing out the baby with the bathwater of the past. Male and female is important, but go ahead.
Male and female are important. There's no doubt about it. You have to trust, okay? Part of what you're talking about, one is Hollywood or whatever, throwing everything out at us, making it as shocking as it can be for us to wake up and say, whoa, to begin to accept little things, okay? That's one. That's for the masses. Your sister and that age group they're trying to find themselves. Mm-hmm. The same way generations before have tried to find themselves through drugs, through, smoking marijuana and whatever, trying to see what, we had Carlos Castaneda. I say we, I'm glorifying myself. I was a little beyond that even. But there's always something. Okay, and it's all about trying to find who you are. Mm-hmm. All right, so I used to panic at those things. I used to really be worried. I'm not as worried anymore myself because, as you say, it always comes back. And when it comes back, there's some acceptance that comes back for the difference, the fear of the unknown. The fear of the unknown has dissipated. Mm-hmm. Because now it's more known to the masses. Yeah. So there is the person who is mentally disturbed who may take that and go crazy with it, or she or he. But for the majority, they're starting to say, oh, well, Yeah. It used to be, as you say, if a person came out of the closet, told their family they were gay, they were sent down the road. The family would have nothing to do with them ever again. Imagine that. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. What if you're hurt in a car and you come home and you can't do it, you can't move your body anymore? Are they going to say, that's it, get out of here? Mm-hmm. That's how, in a way, society learns and learns to accept and have empathy and compassion. Mm-hmm. And anyway.
Well, I absolutely agree with what you're saying.
I'm just saying, don't worry too much.
Yeah, well, but people's lives get destroyed in that learning process.
I know.
And I worry just like the mistake we made in the past is by making every girl feel like she was less than a girl unless she was Betty Homemaker. Now we're making people feel like they need to be ashamed of the fact that they're,
Different.
well, no, that they're straight,
Oh, okay, yeah.
that they're not
Yeah,
different.
Okay.
And
Maybe they will be different.
and it's like, are we making the same mistakes as we did in the past by, again, the pendulum swinging too far the other way to the point now where it's so popular and so always out there.
That's why we're dialoguing.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. That's just a point of concern because when you're young, when you're 12 years old, I don't know what it's like to be a 12-year-old girl, but a 12-year-old guy, it's almost hard to even exist because your hormones are so they're
So is the girls,
okay. Well, they're in charge of your body.
yeah.
Okay, they're in charge. Your hormones are very much in charge of your mental state, and you are very susceptible to mistakes. You are going to make mistakes. And that's the time where you can make, during that time period, that 12 to 18 years old, if you're going to go off the rails, a lot of times that's where you go off the rails. You fall in with the wrong crowd because you're extremely persuadable.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
malleable. And I worry about in today's culture the lack of respect for what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man in the kind of in the original sense, in the natural sense. Obviously, as population grows, you're going to get a much larger swath of people that are all across, and everybody is important. But I just worry nowadays that we're getting too much in the point. Nobody talks about what it means to be a real man anymore.
Well, that's what has to be talked about.
Yeah.
That's what you have to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You have to talk, you have this, you have to talk to your sister about that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to talk to your cousin about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important. Maybe you have to talk to a group of young people about that,
Mm-hmm.
with an older person with you,
Yeah.
actually. If you're talking to young girls or something,
Yeah.
once you get arrested or something. It's so crazy today.
Oh, it's crazy. And I think one of the things that you're doing through Cough and through kind of what you've dedicated your life to is, the spirituality of life, and looking internally. Because when you look internally, you start finding the answers within more than searching for the answers everywhere
That's
else.
exactly correct.
And so maybe that's the way you solve it.
And that is respect. Again, you brought up respect a few times, and I think we have to respect our bodies.
Yeah.
We don't think in terms of that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about that. We talk about being beautiful. Looking good, having muscles. We talk about all this, having good diets, not eating too much, being thin. All this stuff. But we have to respect our bodies. And what is the most important word, Brett?
Moderation.
Yeah. And we talked about that when you were, what?
Forever.
2 years of age.
And 2 years ago.
And 2
2
years
weeks
ago.
ago, yeah.
And Brett, I would say to you anytime, what is the most important word to remember in the English language? And you'd say, moderation, Nana, moderation. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
but I think respect, and I think the one word we haven't talked about is responsibility.
Okay.
And that's huge. And maybe we can talk about that.
In what way?
Well, each of us has, I believe, we have, whether you're a business person, the unions, we were talking about the unions, but the missing politicians, the mother, the father, we have responsibility. We have responsibility to ourselves, and that's what I meant about respect for our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We have responsibility to our family, our immediate family, to our friends, And then I think in time, we see that go out. We also have a responsibility to our milieu, as they say, the world around us, okay? And that has to do, kind of goes hand in hand with that consciousness that we talked about. And I'm going to give you an example. When I was a little girl, about 11, we didn't have air conditioning in those days, and to cool off at the end of a hot summer night, my father and my mother would take us for a ride in the car. We'd have our bath, we'd put on our pajamas, we'd get in the car, we'd roll the windows down, and we would cool off that way before we went to bed. And I remember so clearly once my mother got in the car and she looked in the back seat and she said, "This car looks like a pigsty. Oh, I can't stand this." And she had a little paper bag and she started sticking papers, cigarette butts, because people smoked all the time in the car. She was cleaning up the car, and then she turned around and threw her garbage out the window. You see, that same mother years ago, as an 89-year-old woman, would never have done something like that at this time in her life, because her little world of her family, this little tiny group, had expanded. And the world wasn't just the world, it was her world. And she had a responsibility to it. That's why she wouldn't do it. And that's what I mean by responsibility. I think that we don't look at the word, we don't like the word sometimes, but it's so crucial to humanity, to life itself.
Well, that's because it comes with a lot of responsibilities. Once you start taking ownership of who you are and what you're doing, because responsibility and ownership are kind of the same thing. Once you start taking ownership of the earth, if you take ownership of your relationships, well then all of a sudden it's on you. All of a sudden all these things that you could be doing become obvious. Whereas when you're just living in your own little bubble, or everything else is somebody else's problem, well, of course there's nothing to do with it. But as soon as you take responsibility, well, now I gotta take responsibility. This stuff has to get cleaned up.
So then we make America great again, but we also make Canada
I
great.
knew I'd get you to say that at some point.
Yeah, oh, you wanted to hear it, didn't you? Well, it's true though. We make it great, but we make our neighbors great. We make Mexico great. We continue expanding outward until we go all the way to the universe.
Yeah. Well, high tide raises all boats, and I think that, that's just kind of one of those things from a civilization standpoint that doesn't get thought of. If your neighbor's houses are both pieces of crap, your property value isn't going to be as high as it should be. And the same thing goes for relationships, and the same thing goes for countries. All right, it can't just all be about you or your thing. You have to lead.
And it's my neighbor's property is my property.
Yep.
So how can I help?
How can I help it out? And that's where I think it takes the empathy.
And the responsibility.
And I mean, think about that. It takes the Democrats' empathy to say, you know what, I can put myself in their shoes. Okay, I don't agree with them as some of the things they've done, but I want to help them out of kindness. And then it kind of takes the other side, sometimes industry, to say, okay, well, here's how we're going to do it. And then you can kind of get things done. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think, how can we kind of recap some of the ideas? Because we've touched on a lot today.
We've touched on a few different things. Well, I think that the mission is to have a free-flowing conversation, and to touch on multiple points throughout the various conversations, and speak from the heart and all that stuff. And so that's going to naturally carry these things into different subjects and categories. But I think that we touched on a few different things here. I think we touched on gender. I think we touched on the right and the left to a certain regard. I think we touched on, obviously, responsibility.
Dialogue.
Dialogue. And
Change.
And I think that those are all gonna be subjects that, as we kind of refine this process and we keep on doing this, we're gonna be touching on again, and going into more detail.
Fear. I would like to look at fear a little bit more
I think
too.
fear, yeah, I think that's the number one thing we're all trying to get rid of, so,
Or face.
yeah,
Or the big way, embrace it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, so, okay,
All right.
well, I think that does it for today. There you go, 50-year divide.